In 1243, on a battlefield in eastern Anatolia, the Mongol Empire achieved a decisive and world-shaping victory when it crushed the Sultanate of Rum, the most powerful Turkic state in the region, as part of a broader grand strategy aimed at dominating all of Western Asia and ensuring that no Turk power would ever again pose a serious challenge to Mongol supremacy. Yet history is full of paradoxes, and 2 centuries later, in 1453, another Turkic empire, the Ottoman Empire, captured Constantinople, bringing an end to the 1,000-year-old Byzantine Empire and rising to become one of the most powerful empires in world history, ruling for over 600 years across 3 continents. The paradox is striking. In their attempt to eliminate Turkic power in Anatolia, the Mongols unintentionally created the very conditions that allowed the greatest Turkic empire to emerge. How can a military victory produce the opposite of its intended result? How can destruction become creation? And what does this story reveal about unintended consequences in history? To answer this, we must return to 1243, but the roots of the story stretch back much further, to the year 1071. At the Battle of Manzikert, the Seljuk Turks defeated the Byzantine Empire, opening Anatolia to Turkic conquest and settlement. This was not merely an invasion by an army. It was a migration of an entire civilization. Turkic peoples from the Central Asian steppes arrived with their warriors, families, religious traditions, and social structures, fundamentally reshaping the region. In 1077, they established the Sultanate of Rum, with Rum meaning Rome, a reference to the former Eastern Roman lands they now ruled. By the late 12th and early 13th centuries, the Sultanate of Rum reached its peak. It was not simply a military power, but a flourishing center of civilization. The sultans constructed extensive caravanserai networks along trade routes connecting Central Asia to the Mediterranean, facilitating commerce and cultural exchange. Trade thrived, particularly with Genoa, and cities such as Konya became centers of scholarship where astronomy, mathematics, theology, and philosophy were taught. What made Rum especially distinctive was its cultural synthesis. Although ruled by Turkic elites, the sultans adopted Persian names. Persian became the language of administration and literature, and Persian architectural and artistic styles dominated public life. The Turkic rulers understood that to govern a settled and sophisticated land, they had to learn from its established traditions. Military strength combined with Persian cultural refinement produced a unique Turco-Persian civilization. However, like all states in history, the Sultanate of Rum faced mounting pressures. From the west, Crusader states repeatedly threatened its borders, while from the east a new and far more terrifying force emerged. In 1206, Genghis Khan united the Mongol tribes, unleashing a wave of conquest unlike anything the world had seen. Over the next 2 decades, Mongol armies swept across Central Asia with devastating speed. Between 1219 and 1221, they annihilated the Khwarezmian Empire, one of the most powerful Islamic states of the era. Cities such as Bokhara, Samarkand, and Merv were destroyed, and millions of people were killed. This was not merely conquest. It was psychological warfare, sending a clear message that resistance meant annihilation. By the early 1230s, the Mongols had conquered much of Persia and now stood on the borders of the Sultanate of Rum. Initially, the rulers of Rum acted pragmatically. In 1236, Sultan Kaikabad acknowledged Mongol overlordship and agreed to pay tribute. This decision preserved relative autonomy and allowed the Sultanate to continue governing its lands. For several years, this arrangement succeeded. However, in 1241, the great Khan Ogidi died, plunging the Mongol Empire into a temporary succession crisis. Sultan Kaikisra too interpreted this moment as weakness and saw an opportunity to reclaim independence. He stopped paying tribute, assuming the Mongols were too distracted by internal politics to respond. This proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation. Kaikisra underestimated 2 critical realities. First, that Mongol military organization remained highly effective despite political uncertainty, and second, that allowing a rebellious vassal to go unpunished would undermine Mongol authority everywhere. Mongol General Baiju summoned Kaikisra to reaffirm his submission. When the Sultan refused, Baiju declared war. Kaikisra assembled a vast army of around 80,000 men, forming alliances with the Empire of Trebizond, the Ayyubids of Aleppo, and even hiring Frankish mercenaries. On paper, this coalition appeared formidable, Baiju commanded only about 30,000 Mongol warriors, supported by Georgian and Armenian contingents. The two armies met at the Khozdag Pass between Shivas and Erzincan. Early in the battle, the Rum forces seemed dominant, outnumbering the Mongols nearly 3-1. Yet numbers masked a fatal weakness: lack of cohesion and discipline. The Mongol army functioned as a perfectly trained system, executing maneuvers practiced repeatedly over years. As the battle progressed, the Mongols employed their signature tactic of feigned retreat, drawing the disorganized Rum forces into pursuit before suddenly turning and unleashing relentless volleys of arrows, shattering the coalition's strength and deciding the fate of Anatolia. As the battle unfolded, panic spread to the forces of Rum with astonishing speed, fear infecting unit after unit until discipline collapsed entirely, and that very night the whole Rum army abandoned its camp and fled into the darkness. Sultan Kaykusra himself escaped in haste, not only fearing the Mongols, but also suspecting that some of his own commanders might defect to the enemy to save themselves. When Mongol General Baiju discovered the deserted camp, he initially suspected a ruse and waited an additional day before advancing, a cautious decision that cost him the chance to capture the Sultan, but did nothing to alter the outcome of the campaign. The victory was decisive, and the Sultanate of Rum never recovered. Vizier Muhezib al-Din was forced to negotiate terms of surrender that were crushing beyond measure. Rum was required to pay an enormous annual tribute consisting of 12 million silver coins, 500 bolts of silk, 500 camels, and 5,000 sheep, an amount equivalent to roughly 400,000 gold dinars, all transported to Mongolia at Rum's own expense. A Mongol overseer was installed to supervise Anatolia, and although the Sultan technically remained on the throne, he ruled only at Mongol command. When Kaykusra died in 1246, his three sons immediately fell into bitter conflict, splitting the kingdom into three rival realms. The Mongols actively encouraged this fragmentation, understanding that a divided sultanate was far easier to control than a unified one. From 1243 to 1308, the Sultanate of Rum existed largely in name alone, while real authority rested firmly in Mongol hands. In 1256, all of Anatolia formally submitted to Monk Khan, and by 1264, following the death of Sultan Kilij Arslan IV, effective governance passed to Mongol-appointed viceroys. Central authority eroded year by year as local lords began acting independently, and across Anatolia dozens of small beyliks emerged, each ruled by its own ambitious leader. By 1308, the last Seljuk Sultan was assassinated, and the Sultanate of Rum officially ceased to exist. This was not merely a political collapse, but a profound social transformation. Where Anatolia had once been governed by a strong, centralized state, it now became a fragmented landscape with no single power capable of restoring unity. Law was inconsistent, security was unstable, and rival beyliks competed constantly for land and resources. Yet within this chaos, opportunity quietly took root. In 1258, just 15 years after the disaster at Khozdag, a child named Osman was born in the small village of Sagat in northwestern Anatolia. His father, Ertugrul, led a modest Turkic tribe of the Kei clan, which had previously received grazing lands from the Seljuk Sultans in return for military service. When Osman inherited leadership, his beylik was tiny, smaller than half of modern Switzerland, but it possessed a crucial geographic advantage. Situated in northwestern Anatolia, it lay far enough in the Mongol-controlled east to avoid direct interference, yet close enough to the weakening Byzantine frontier in the west to offer constant opportunities for expansion. After the Mongols destroyed the Seljuk state, thousands of Turkic warriors, farmers, scholars, and Muslim clerics searched desperately for safety and purpose. They could not move eastward, where Mongol rule was absolute, nor could they remain in central Anatolia, which had descended into violent competition among rival beyliks. To the west, however, stood a small frontier state facing the Byzantines, long viewed as enemies of the faith. For Ghazi warriors who believed holy struggle was a sacred duty, this frontier was ideal. Osman's beylik became a magnet, not because it was powerful, but because it was positioned perfectly. It offered something no other region could: the chance to fight, expand, and escape Mongol dominance. People arrived in waves, each bringing valuable skills. Warriors contributed combat experience. Craftsmen supplied technical knowledge. Scholars offer administrative and legal expertise, and clerics provided religious legitimacy. Osman himself was not an extraordinary military genius, but he possessed three decisive qualities. First, patience. He avoided reckless battles and instead expanded gradually, capturing small Byzantine fortresses one by one. Second, organizational talent. He transformed loosely organized nomadic fighters into a structured force, establishing systems of taxation, justice, and administration. Third, the ability to attract loyalty. Osman governed Muslims and Christians alike with fairness, and many Byzantine officials, recognizing their empire's decline, surrendered to him and were treated well. In 1299, Osman made a move of immense symbolic importance. He declared independence from the Sultanate of Rum, which by then existed only as a shadow, and ordered that Friday's sermons be proclaimed in his own name rather than that of the Seljuk Sultan or the Mongols. This act signaled a clear political statement. A new state had been born. That year, 1299, is traditionally regarded as the founding of the Ottoman Empire, though at the time it was still a small frontier principality that could be crossed on foot in a few days. Yet the seed had been planted. Over the next quarter century, Osman doubled his territory, and in 1326 his son Orhan captured Bursa, a major city just 150 kilometers from Constantinople. Bursa became the first Ottoman capital, and from this base the Ottomans expanded relentlessly. Over the following 127 years, they transformed from a modest beylik into a world empire, culminating in the conquest of Constantinople in 1453. The ultimate irony is that the Mongols, one of the most disciplined and intelligent empires in history, unintentionally created conditions for the rise of the very power they sought to prevent. They excelled at destroying centralized states, but in Anatolia, that destruction shattered unity so completely that it opened space for something new, dynamic, and ultimately unstoppable to emerge. The Mongols crushed the Sultanate of Rum, yet they never established an effective replacement structure in Anatolia. Why? Because this region was peripheral to their empire, merely a distant province on the edge of a vast dominion. The Mongols were content to collect tribute, impose taxes, and maintain a level of chaos that prevented any single force from consolidating power. They had no interest in long-term governance or creating stability. Their priority lay elsewhere, in more central and strategically vital territories. In this vacuum of power, dozens of small beyliks emerged, each competing for local influence, but one of these, positioned in the right location at the right moment, would eventually evolve into the Ottoman Empire. When the Mongols devastated Central Asia and Persia, hundreds of thousands fled westward. These were far from ordinary refugees. They were experienced warriors, skilled craftsmen, learned scholars, and seasoned administrators who had served in sophisticated courts. They brought not only individual talents, but also institutional knowledge, how to organize armies, manage territories, and run bureaucracies. Osman and his successors did not invent everything from scratch. They adapted lessons from prior empires, even learning indirectly from Mongol organizational practices. The weakening of Byzantium created an additional opening. The Fourth Crusade of 1204 had already sacked Constantinople, leaving the Byzantine Empire politically fractured, economically depleted, and militarily vulnerable. Civil wars, financial crises, and continuous territorial losses further eroded Byzantine capacity to resist new threats. Into this environment, the Ottomans built a unique identity around the concept of Ghazi warriors, fighters for Islam. This was not mere propaganda. It was a motivating principle that attracted skilled warriors from across the Islamic world. While other Anatolian beyliks engaged in internecine conflict, the Ottomans maintained a clear strategic objective: westward expansion into Byzantine lands. This unifying purpose provided cohesion, focus, and momentum. Viewed through the lens of systems thinking, the Mongols' campaign exemplifies both intentional short-term optimization and unforeseen long-term consequences. They achieved their immediate objective. The Sultanate of Rum was destroyed and potential Anatolian threats neutralized, but they failed to account for what would arise from the power vacuum they created. By pushing populations westward, dispersing skilled human capital, and leaving no stable governance structures, the Mongols inadvertently established the conditions for a new, highly organized, and eventually far stronger power to emerge. Osman's beylik, initially modest in size and influence, was perfectly positioned geographically. It lay far enough from Mongol oversight to remain autonomous, while being close enough to Byzantium to seize opportunities for expansion. The influx of refugees, warriors, scholars, and administrators provided the manpower and expertise Osman needed. His success demonstrates the interplay of talent, context, and timing. Osman was patient, gradually expanding territory by capturing minor Byzantine fortresses rather than rushing into large-scale confrontations. He exhibited organizational skill, transforming a semi-nomadic fighting force into a disciplined army and instituting administrative, fiscal, and judicial systems. He also showed political acumen, attracting loyalty from Muslims and Christians alike, and treating surrendered Byzantine officials fairly, thereby consolidating influence without unnecessary bloodshed. By 1299, Osman made a decisive and symbolic declaration of independence from the remnants of the Sultanate of Rum, signaling the birth of the Ottoman state, though at that time it was a small frontier principality. Over the next 25 years, Osman doubled his territory, and by 1326 his son Orhan captured Bursa, which became the first Ottoman capital. From this foundation, the Ottomans expanded relentlessly, ultimately capturing Constantinople in 1453 and establishing an empire that would last over 6 centuries. The paradox is clear. The Mongols, among the most disciplined and strategically sophisticated empires in history, inadvertently created the conditions for the rise of the very power they sought to prevent. Their short-term victory destroyed the existing political structure, but opened a long-term opportunity for a new state, populated by skilled migrants and situated in a strategic location. This story illustrates a critical lesson about complex systems. No action occurs in isolation, and even the most carefully planned interventions can produce unforeseen and far-reaching consequences. Every choice interacts with multiple variables, often generating results that defy immediate logic. The Mongols' destruction of Rum did not create emptiness. It created opportunity. The question, therefore, is not simply whether to dismantle a power structure, but who or what will fill the resulting void. Failure to anticipate the answer carries profound risk. Osman was not initially the strongest or richest lord, yet his geographic advantage, combined with the movement of people and the collapse of Byzantine authority, allowed him to seize historical momentum. Context was decisive. Without it, neither talent nor ambition would have sufficed. The Mongols destroyed one power in Anatolia, and over 2 centuries later, the descendants of those displaced populations created an empire that reshaped the region and became one of the most powerful in world history. This teaches humility. We cannot fully predict the long-term consequences of our actions. What appears as victory may sow the seeds of future rivals, while apparent setbacks may set the stage for unforeseen successes. In life, in organizations, and in history, the lesson is to act cautiously, anticipate unintended effects, and remain adaptable. The Mongols inadvertently paved the way for their own geopolitical challenge, and the Ottomans capitalized on every opportunity presented by the resulting chaos. The rise of the Ottomans is a story of timing, context, patience, and the ability to harness displaced human capital. It reminds us that systems are interconnected, outcomes are rarely linear, and both destruction and creation are intertwined. So, the Battle of Khosdag in 1243 serves not only as a military turning point, but as a profound example of unintended consequences. A decisive Mongol victory eventually catalyzed the emergence of an empire far greater than the one they had defeated, emphasizing the necessity of foresight, adaptability, and strategic humility.